Hey friends, welcome back to another AP World History Review video.
Today we're going to explore and go deeper into the Atlantic revolutions.
And what influenced them.
But before we dive into the revolutions, we must first discuss the important factors that led to them. Let's first talk about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, also known as the Age of Reason, was an intellectual and cultural movement that took place in Europe from the late 17th century to the early 19th century. At this time, some philosophers or Enlightenment thinkers started questioning the authority of governmental and religious powers, such as monarchs and church leaders. Other thinkers tried to apply reason and theories to improve society, while developing ideas of self-determination and individual freedom. For example, John Locke developed the concept that everyone was born with the rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of property, while another thinker, Montesquieu, believed in the separation of powers in the government, dividing it into three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, to prevent tyranny and protect individual rights. These ideas were major contributions that would inspire some Atlantic revolutions directly, such as the American and French revolutions. Another contribution to the revolutions was the various tensions within societies, whether it was colonies against their respective imperial governments, or the many social classes demanding more rights, freedom, sovereignty, etc. And that pretty much sums it up. Now let's head on to the revolutions.
The first Atlantic Revolution that we're going to be talking about today is the American Revolution, which many believe is only between the British and the 13 colonies. However, this is a more nuanced issue, as there was also conflicts between American colony citizens and foreign bodies that came to support individual political parties. To start, the main parties in the American political scene were the Loyalists, who wanted to remain under British rule and citizenship because some believed that the British simply ruled better than what the Americans could come up with in a new state. Thus, because of their British loyalty, they had obligatory British support. The opposing party was the Patriots, where an idea was mutual that the colonies should be able to gain their independence as an autonomous United States of America, a thought derived from the British treatment of the American colonists, which created an environment in which the French could gain revenge on the British from the conclusion of the Seven Years' War. As with their defeat, the French had lost Canada and with it a portion of their European power, giving them reasonable cause to send militia and funds to the Patriots, joining the effort in 1778. So why was there such a separation of thought? Starting with the 1765 Stamp Act, the first direct form of taxation of the American colonists, which included the taxation on legal documents, newspapers, as well as an arbitrary tax on playing cards. This taxation is then followed by a slew of others like the Sugar Act and Tea Tax, that caused colony-wide frustration, and thus campaigns to end the taxes began. As a result of this uprising, British troops were sent to Boston in 1768 to enact the Townshend Acts, or in other words, to enforce the aforementioned taxes on the American people, which the colonists perceived as agitation that was to be fought back against, which occurred for years. Thus, public conflict with the British troops in 1770 led to what is known as the Boston Massacre, in which 5 colonists died, leading to mass publication of anti-British propaganda. The final actions that the British incurred that began the revolution developed as a punishment of the Boston Tea Party, in what was known as the Intolerable Acts, which included but was not limited to the British troops, through the Quartering Act, being given a right to billet in any person's house in which the resident would have to provide food as well. And through the Boston Port Act, the port was closed, as it was known to a great many that it was a large portion of their economic growth, which combined with the taxation created an idea that coined the phrase, no taxation without representation, as the American colonists were not given a voice in government and was taxed with no limitation and no control of their lives, that led to an independence cry. Due to these differences among people under King George III's British rule, the revolution began with the United States Declaration of Independence in 1776, and the war started after Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, with news of British gunshots being spread through Minutemen to the entirety of the 13 colonies in 1775. After these moments, the revolution proceeded over years, from 1775 to 1783, in the form of battles that resulted in various outcomes that ultimately, with French allegiance, resulted in the American patriots achieving victory over the British, leaving the Loyalists to flee back to the motherland or other British colonies due to the increase in hostility towards them in a new state, with the official cessation of the conflict being the Treaty of Paris, which officially declared independence for the colonies, but unfortunately for the involved French, Canada was maintained as a British colony. With a new state created, that marked the end of the American Revolution and the creation of a new constitution for the United States of America that other countries would later use to inspire their own revolutions.
Well, so right. The French people had two things in 1784, anarchy and a lot of debt, with most people even struggling to afford bread. There was a vast wealth inequality remaining in France, with vast expenditures of the royal budget being dedicated to just parties. This would be typical in European politics, but the American Revolution and Enlightenment have been changing things slowly. And if you might have guessed, the monarchy was deeply unpopular within France, with Marie Antoinette being Austrian, and King Louis having trouble producing any heirs. Through all of this, King Louis still decided to raise taxes because he helped pay for the American Revolution. He did try minor reform, summoning the estate's clergy, mainly being ceremonial however. The clergy, the nobles, and the peasantry would all make up the advisory council, which does sound fair until you realize the fact that 90% of the population was in the peasantry. So each time reform was proposed, it kept getting blocked by the other 2%. So in response to this, the higher classes within the peasantry decided to make the National Assembly. But if you needed weapons and gunpowder, where would you go to actually get it? The peasantry had the same problem, and their idea was to storm the Bastille. As you might have guessed, violence was rampant during the Revolution and actually encouraged by the National Assembly. But they weren't all bad. They actually created the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, mainly man. Through all this, the monarch still had some power. It was later removed, making him a constitutional monarch, and instead of living in Versailles, he was moved to Paris. Through all this, France was under immense stress, going through major political instability and still having a ton of debt. The French people asked the question on how do we fix this, and they came to a profound answer, declaring war on Austria, later also suspending the monarchy and making the French First Republic. So they started to remove everything that reminded them of the monarchy, such as the church and nobles. Through this, the king and queen would die with the use of the guillotine. This would be later called the September Massacres. Religion was replaced by the cult of reason and the cult of the supreme being, with the latter being led by Maximilien Robespierre. For all that, the moderates were still in power. But not for long, the radicals would take power, and then it would start the Reign of Terror. Fear gripped the nation, with any minor offense reported being able to send you to the guillotine. Estimated 40,000 died with the use of the guillotine during this period. Maximilien Robespierre was a leader of many of these movements, with him later on trying to make a grab for power but then getting outvoted instead and sent to the guillotine. Finally, the moderates would take back control, starting the White Terror, suppressing many radicals during the time. An Italian general would be winning many French battles, going through the Alps and signing peace treaties with Austria. This Italian general would later gain popularity and stage a coup in Paris, going on to later establish a dictatorship. Now let's get to the letter and try to ask the question on if France fully understood what they were going through.
Dear Jacobins of the French Revolution, we are seeking insight into your decisions during the struggle to create a new radical republic in France based on the fundamentals of the rights of man and citizen, with the caveat of having the knowledge of what your outcome would be if you stay on your current path. As of now, there was a terrible struggle that your country went through in 3 stages. These stages provide greater violence through leaders of your own, like Maximilien Robespierre, who sought your same outcome, but in doing so committed great violence against opponents of your radical party, such as his decapitation spree during the Reign of Terror, which left your people vulnerable in that they looked for any escape from the mass atrocities that your party will commit. Vulnerability that allows Napoleon to have the status of Emperor of France. With this in mind, our question is, would you still continue to have the same violence and undying faith with a single person, and with a scale of decapitation? Would your ideology still align with Robespierre in that it was justified, or would your head turn? As it is evident that the republic you so greatly strived for was not achieved, rather you circled back to the time worse than what you began with, exemplified by the loss of rights gained in the revolution, i.e. the reinstatement of slavery, we think not. A probable change to achieve this would most likely be a shift to a greater emphasis on power being in the hands of the citizens rather than a single individual, as the power was applied to both Robespierre and Bonaparte. Because this power often goes to one's head and causes mass suffering and complications in their agendas through violence to reach their ends and forced silencing. While with a more democratic base of a group of people rather than a singularity, there can be a discussion of mutual agreement and acceptance that is often more enjoyed by citizens under this resident-run group. Additionally, it would be assumed that as you have a greater capacity for brutality, there would not be a cessation of it, but rather more of a selective force, where the people of France are not terrorized into relying on any person who's willing to stop it. Thus, we await what you, the Jacobins, have concluded in hearing out the future, in that a circle of pain and oppression will incite with ferocity whether if given the opportunity. You would change your response. Or would you regroup and ponder a better, more thought-out course of action for gaining greater freedoms comparable to the United States? Sincerely, the Concept Explained team.
So now, let's get into the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution was one of the most important but overlooked revolts in history. Now, why was it important? Because it was the first ever successful slave revolt that established an independent black republic which terrified and weakened colonial power. Saint-Domingue was among the richest colonies controlled by the French, which ruled over a diverse population. What does a diverse population mean? That different groups wanted different things. The rich Europeans wanted fewer restrictions on trade. The poor Europeans wanted more rights. The freed slaves wanted more equality. And the slaves obviously wanted their freedom. Then, in 1791, things quickly blew up. A massive slave uprising led to 1,000 plantations being burned to the ground. And this uprising was led by Toussaint Louverture, a brilliant Haitian general. Toussaint Louverture was a wise general who played European nations against one another. For example, Toussaint allied with the Spanish because he knew that the French did not want any other European nation to gain control of Saint-Domingue. But then, in 1794, the French decided to abolish slavery. And can you guess what Toussaint did? He went back to the French side. By 1801, Louverture decided to create and secure autonomy for the people of Saint-Domingue, saying that he would govern them for life, aiming to protect the freedom and equality of the people. But can you guess who did not like that? Napoleon Bonaparte. He sent 20,000 troops to Saint-Domingue in 1802 to regain control of Saint-Domingue and to secretly bring back slavery. Toussaint sadly did not get to see his country gain independence because he was captured by Napoleon in his 1802 expedition, and he was sent to France to be imprisoned. Then, a year later, is when he died. Toussaint's leadership was then passed to Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who later became the Emperor of Haiti and who led the final throes of the revolution. He led the Haitians in the Battle of Vertières and defeated the French in late 1803. Finally, on January 1st, 1804, it was declared by Dessalines that Haiti was finally free, making it the second independent country in the Americas and the first independent nation that was born from a slave revolt.
Let's take a deeper look at what sparked the Mexican stride for independence and the events that led up to it. In the years of continued French Revolution, historical figures such as Napoleon Bonaparte had made alliances with the leadership and crown of Spain in the year of 1804. During these French wars, the region of Spain became a financial and governmental ally, which over the course of battles reversed into rivalry, and with this reverse alliance, the American colonies under the control of Spain had observed a discrepancy in commercial trade. and 2. Include all of the financial debt that the Spain government had accumulated over the years of assisting the French in their conflicts. A massive amount of resources had been called for to be drained from the American colonies to repay their debt during the economic situation that obviously caused for a weakening of the Spain government. This weak government carried out as an opening or opportunity for the adoption of a provisional government, which was used to stabilize the state of Spain until further issues were resolved. This form of government had allowed for high social classes of encomienda system, a government system run by the Spanish government that separates citizens off the percentage of Spanish blood and location of birth to rise as government officials, which obviously caused for a disagreement between societies. With these higher social classes wanting to exclude the lower half of the encomienda system from the political crisis, as they were sought as to be unfit for the government position. And with the huge maltreatment towards lower social classes given by the government, this situation had brought awareness to figures such as priest Miguel Hidalgo to lead revolutions for them, such as the Cry of Pain, which shedded light towards the injustice portrayed within the American colonies and low-status individuals of society who followed and practiced the beliefs of independence from the Enlightenment movement. With revolts towards the Spanish government during these vital situations, the region of Mexico will gain their independence from Spain in the year of 1821 through military combat and years of protest.
These were the Atlantic Revolutions, the American, French, Haitian, and Mexican.
which were inspired by the Enlightenment and various tensions.
Thank you for watching.
Bye.